Every moment of your life, your mind is not receiving reality, it is constructing it. What we call perception is not a passive recording of the world, it's an active projection of the brain's predictions, memories, and assumptions. Neuroscience calls this projection predictive processing. The Gnostic texts call it blindness, sleep, or seeing only images instead of truth. The Gnostics understood what neuroscience now confirms. You do not see reality, you see your conditioning. In other words, the world is not hidden, but your awareness of it is. Your brain filters information based on what it thinks matters to you, what is relevant, what is threatening, what confirms your story, and what keeps your world predictable. This is where the sense of, quote, who I am comes in. However, it's not your true identity, it's the constructed self model your brain uses to navigate the world. The internal story about what kind of person you are, what you must defend, what you fear losing, what roles you're supposed to play, how others see you, and what you consider safe, unsafe, possible, or impossible. Perception is not neutral, it's identity dependent. Who you believe yourself to be, your beliefs, values, roles, memories, culture, and self story forms the lens through which you interpret everything around you. You're not seeing reality directly. You're seeing reality through the identity your brain is currently protecting. This self model becomes the operating system behind perception. When it's wounded, perception becomes threat biased. When it's inflated or defensive, perception becomes ego biased. When it's people pleasing, perception becomes approval biased. When it's rigid, perception becomes narrow and reactive. And when it's unquestioned, perception becomes automatic and unconscious. But when that self model loosens, even slightly, the nervous system calms, the mind stops jumping to conclusions, the inner chatter quiets, and the brain stops forcing reality to match an old internal story. Perception becomes clearer because the mind is no longer inserting itself between awareness and what is perceived. Brain doesn't wait for the world to tell it what is happening. It predicts, fills in, filters, and edits sensory information before you are even aware a perception has formed. This is how meaning is created and how beliefs, opinions, and attitudes take shape. Jesus points to this filtering process directly in the Gospel of Thomas when he says, quote, know what is in front of your face, and what is hidden from you will be revealed. What he is saying basically is that if you cannot see what is right in front of you, the problem is not the world, it's the architecture through which you're looking at the world. Jesus also says in the Gospel of Thomas, quote, the kingdom is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it. What Jesus calls seeing is not eyesight, it's the negotiation between memory, expectation, and identity, a negotiation that often distorts what is into what the mind expects. The Gospel of Philip also describes this filter when it says, quote, truth did not come into the world naked, but it came in types and images. The false self sees only the images, the projections, not the truth beneath them. Modern psychology calls this top down processing, where the brain uses prior knowledge, expectations, and context to interpret incoming data. Jesus calls it illusion. In Thomas, he says, quote, "Images are visible to people, but the light within them is hidden." He is describing the false self's perceptual architecture. It sees the image, it misses the light of reality and truth. Modern neuroscience now confirms the same pattern. Your brain's predictions are shaped by your self model. When the self model softens, perception becomes less filtered and more direct. This is the moment perception shifts from being about the world to being in it. When the perceived self collapses, perception reorganizes. The Gnostic texts call this awakening, remembering, or returning to the origin. The Gospel of Thomas says, quote, "When you know yourselves, you will be known." Knowing yourself and being known is a reciprocal process. The world is no longer something you view through a lens. It becomes something that reveals you. Mary's gospel describes this shift when it says, "Where the mind is, there is the treasure." The treasure is not an object, it is unobstructed seeing. When the mind rests in being, perception clears. Jesus' language about the single eye in Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 to 23 maps onto the idea of unobstructed perception almost exactly, once we interpret it in its original context and not as a moral warning, but as a statement about how awareness functions. The Greek word for single is hapless, meaning whole, undivided, and uncomplicated. Jesus is describing perception that is not split between competing identities, fears, or self concepts. The single eye is simply undivided awareness. When Jesus says, quote, "The lamp of the body is the eye," he is pointing to perception as illumination. A lamp doesn't create objects, it determines how clearly things are seen. In the same way, perception doesn't create reality, it determines how reality appears. When perception is single, light moves through awareness without obstruction. When perception is divided, the distortion comes not from the world, but from the observer. This teaching sits directly beneath Jesus' statement in the Gospel of Mary, where he says, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." What you value determines where your attention rests, and where your attention rests determines how you see. If the treasure is status, control, or self protection, perception bends around those aims. But when identity rests in being itself, the I am, perception no longer has a job to do except see. That is transparent perception. This is why Jesus contrasts the single eye with the evil eye in Matthew 6, verses 22 to 23. In Jewish usage, an evil eye wasn't wickedness, it was fragmentation, envy, comparison, scarcity, self referencing. A divided gaze constantly asks, "What does this mean about me?" or "Am I safe?" The result is not moral darkness, but perceptual darkness. Even light becomes shadowed when awareness is crowded out by self protection. In Hebrew thought, This contrast between the single eye and the evil eye was a well-known idiom. A good eye meant openness, generosity, and an undefended posture toward reality. An evil eye meant stinginess, envy, and a self-protective stance that narrows perception. Jesus is drawing directly on this tradition. He is not warning about moral wickedness, but about fragmented awareness, a perceptual stance bent around scarcity, comparison, and self reference. In this light, the evil eye is simply the false self scanning for threat, while the single eye is awareness that no longer needs to defend an identity. The Hebraic idiom reveals that Jesus is describing states of perception, not behavior. Openness sees clearly. Defended identity darkens the field. Seen through this lens, Jesus' teaching is not mystical or moralistic. It is perceptual. A single eye is perception without self-interference, awareness that is no longer bent around maintaining an identity. Thoughts still arise, emotions still arise, discernment still functions, but perception is no longer trying to secure the self. Light passes through awareness without distortion. In one sentence, when nothing is being protected, everything becomes visible. The architecture of perception is the architecture of consciousness. It determines how you meet the world, how you interpret experience, and how you recognize yourself. The Gnostic texts say the world is already illuminated. It is the observer who is dimmed. Science says perception is a prediction. It is the observer who must be updated. Both traditions agree. When identity awakens, perception follows. The next time you look at the world, ask, is this reality or is this my architecture? Because perception is not what reveals the world. Perception is what reveals you. This episode has given you the architecture, but architecture is only the blueprint. To understand how perception actually operates in real time, in conflict, in relationships, in fear, in desire, in silence, in identity, you need to see the components up close. That's what the short form videos in this series are designed to do. Each one takes a single element of perception, identity, prediction, emotion, attention, memory, the false self, and the I am, and breaks it down with clinical clarity and practical examples. Think of this episode as the map. The short videos are the landmarks. Together, they reveal not just how you see the world, but how the world is trying to reveal you. Thanks for watching.